Next questions, like from bench changeover. Yeah. All right. No, not really. All right. No. All right. Cheers. Well done. We now come to the Attorney General, Rachael Maskell. I think.
Number one, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 1, 5, 7, 8 and 9 together. I visited Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories between the 14th and the 16th of February. In Israel, I met the Attorney General, lawyers for the Israeli Defence Force and the President of the Supreme Court. In the West Bank, I met with the Palestinian Attorney General and the Prime Minister.
Rachael Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. History will not judge kindly when asked if we did everything possible to prevent a possible genocide in Gaza in the light of the scale of suffering from weapons, disease and hunger, and the ICJ interim order on restraint. When meeting with the officials which the Attorney General has referred to, did she clarify the ICJ order must be adhered to fully under the Genocide Convention? And did she give any indication that the UK will cease its participation in arms sales into Israel until it does?
I know the Honourable Lady cares very deeply about this region, as she and I have visited there together. I would like to reassure her that my discussions with those I met in both Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories were very frank. I am confident that our messages were clearly delivered. I made clear the importance of international humanitarian law being respected, civilians protected, and detainees being held in compliance with the Geneva Conventions.
Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The FCDO Minister stated that the government respects the ICJ's independence and role, but doesn't think that its ruling of possible plausible genocide was helpful. So with forcible displacement, demolition of homes and structures and near famine in Gaza, plus expansion of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank worsening daily, how would she, who's seen all this stuff with her own eyes, propose upholding international law before it's too late?
The Honourable Lady and I served on the Justice Select Committee together, and I know that she shares, as I do, a deep feeling that we must do everything we can to make sure that international humanitarian law is respected in this region. The UK has raised with Israel repeatedly the need to limit operations to military targets, to protect in particular health facilities and to avoid harming civilians. I know that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have raised this repeatedly with their counterparts.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK government's less than wholehearted endorsement of the ICJ process and the ICC war crimes investigation, which is led by British lawyers, and this is the view of Israeli civil society organisations that came to meet us under the instructions with the cooperation of Yakad yesterday. What it means is that increasingly the alternative is that people turn to violence. We have to uphold international law. Will she recommit to both of those processes?
The Honourable Gentleman has campaigned for a long time about these issues, and I know he feels particularly passionately about this region as well. I am absolutely happy to commit this government once again to upholding wherever we can international humanitarian law. We know that across this House there is a great deal of consensus. We want the fighting to stop now. We are calling for an immediate pause to get aid in and the hostages out, and then to progress to a permanent ceasefire. We applaud that part of the provisional measures of the ICJ, which calls for exactly that.
Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now 7 weeks since the ICJ issued its interim ruling on Israel's conduct in Gaza. Not only has the Netanyahu government failed to comply with that ruling, but we are still waiting for the UK government to urge them to do so. Therefore, will the Attorney General take the opportunity today to call on Israel to take the steps ordered by the court?
We don't feel that that case was particularly helpful at this moment in the negotiation process. We absolutely respect the ICJ. I've appeared there myself, and we understand that the interim measures order that was given is of course binding on the parties. As I said to the honourable gentleman just a moment ago, elements of that provisional measures order are extremely sensible, and we would wholeheartedly respect them and call, as the ICJ has done, for aid to go in and the hostages to come out immediately. That is the right way to proceed if we are ever to achieve a permanent ceasefire and ultimately a resolution of this dreadful conflict. However, we do not think terms such as genocide without a formal final ruling of a court are ones that are particularly helpful to use.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Attorney General's strong condemnation of settler violence against Bedouin communities in the occupied Palestinian territories, and also welcome the sanctions recently imposed on some of those involved in the violence. Based on her recent visit, does she think there's a need to go further by sanctioning those extremist Israeli politicians who are encouraging the violent and illegal expansion of settlements?
When I visited the region with the Honourable Lady from York Central, which a visit I just referred to, we were able to see, that was many years ago now, and we were able to see some of the actions of settlers in the occupied territories. I so far as I was able to, reprise that visit again recently, when I visited most recently, and I was surprised at the difference in the level of violence used. I was able to visit a Bedouin village, and I was able to talk firsthand to those who feel that at a very difficult time for the farming community there during lambing, they were being pushed off their land. I listened very carefully to what the Honourable Gentleman says, and I would like to reassure him that the Government continues to keep this under review.
Chair of Select Committee, Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Attorney's comments. I think every one of us shares the desire for the fighting to stop, and every one of us shares respect for the International Court of Justice. But would she also agree that it's perhaps important that we are careful when we use legal terms in the course of broader political debate, and that, for example, the test of plausibility in the jurisprudence of the International Court of Justice is essentially one about the admissibility of a claim rather than its ultimate merits, and has been described by the court itself in the judgment involving Myanmar as being a low threshold. So it's important, but we should be careful about not making more of a preliminary finding than might otherwise be the case before the final litigation is concluded.
The Chairman of the Select Committee makes, as ever, a very important point, and may I take this opportunity from the dispatch box to congratulate him on becoming an honorary KC, which is, I understand, going to take place on Monday. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in saying that we think he is extremely worthy of this very significant honour, and we're all thrilled that that is going to take place. He does make an important point. Words really matter. I know that there will be a statement shortly before this House, Mr. Speaker, about that and about the meaning of the term extremism. It is very important, particularly in this very long-running and difficult conflict, that we all choose our words very carefully. We do respect the rulings of the ICJ, of course we do, but that doesn't mean that we think every case before it is well brought.
Sir William Cash.
On the issue of international conventions, treaties and international law, including international humanitarian law and the International Refugee Convention, will the Attorney General place in the House of Commons library over the weekend the legal statement as to the circumstances in which international law is trumped by clear and unambiguous words in an Act of Parliament, and include in that statement the necessary citations from the Supreme Court and the House of Lords?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman is a great and long-standing member of this House and is able to bring in questions to questions that might not automatically be obvious. We're talking here about Palestinian counterparts and Israeli counterparts in compliance with international law, but I am of course delighted to say again to the honourable gentleman that we, as this government, is committed to international law. We've said that repeatedly from the dispatch box, and I don't see any need to lay a statement such as he suggests, though I will, of course, continue to enjoy the conversations I have with him on this topic.
Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week in The Other Place, with regard to this tragic conflict in the Middle East, the Foreign Secretary said, "You have to obey the rules and obey the law." This is an important affirmation from this government that Israel both has a right to self-defence but very much has a duty to obey international humanitarian law. Can the Attorney-General reaffirm that this government will continue to stress both this right and this duty in this conflict that we all want to end as soon as possible?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I would not like any member of this House to be in any doubt that we all across this House want this fighting to stop now. That message is delivered by the government on behalf of this House and on behalf of the nation repeatedly and loudly. We are calling for an immediate pause to get aid in, hostages out, and then progress to a permanent ceasefire. We need 5 things to happen. We need the release of the hostages. We need the formation of a new Palestinian government. We need to stop Hamas's capacity to launch attacks. We need for Hamas to no longer be in charge of Gaza, and we need a credible pathway to a 2-state solution. I think we can all get behind that.
Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Crown Prosecution Service is transforming the way that it supports victims. The Victim Transformation Programme will roll out this spring. For example, every adult rape victim will receive an invitation to meet their prosecution team before their case goes to trial.
Jones.
Can I thank my honourable friend for that answer? The tension resulting from the conflict in Israel and Gaza is causing an escalation in hate crimes. What progress is my honourable friend making, alongside the CPS, to ensure the victims of these crimes, and indeed the victims of any hate crime, are receiving full support and the perpetrators prosecuted?
Well, my right honourable friend raises the absolutely key point about the support that's given to victims. The programmes that the CPS are rolling out include closer working between the police and the CPS precisely to support victims. And he'll be pleased to know that in the rolling year to September 2023, the Crown Prosecution Service prosecuted 12,508 hate crime offences with a charge rate of 86%, a conviction rate of 84%. And in 78% of those cases, the judge increased the offender's sentence because they agreed that those were hate crimes.
Very Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, would the Minister agree, though, that some of the most tragic cases lose through murder a member of your family? And then could he answer, are the coroner's courts and the coroner's system up for the, could it be modernised? The delays that some of my constituents have to wait before a coroner's court is long and unacceptable. Would he agree?
Well, the honourable member raises a really key point. There's nothing more tragic than the circumstances that he outlines. I'm very happy to meet with him to talk about any specific case concerns that he has, but more broadly, I'm very acutely aware of the pressures, and I will be looking to see anything I can do to make sure that the pressures and stresses on his constituents are alleviated.
Shadow AG and the Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely certain that the Attorney-General and the Solicitor-General will have been as shocked as I was to read this week's report by researchers at Warwick University into the recent handling of rape cases by the CPS. In far too many areas, the picture it paints is simply appalling. Poor communication, poor quality control, poor decision-making, outdated attitudes, stereotypes, victim blaming, added to the constant problem of staff being overworked and under-resourced. The one positive is that it was the CPS that commissioned this report in the first place. They have not shied away from its findings, and researchers are clear that the rollout of Operation Soteria will take things in the right direction. But do the law officers agree with me that we simply cannot leave things there? Will they undertake to come back to the House with an action plan based on the specific findings of this report and a clear timetable for its implementation?
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for raising this case. Yes, I'm horrified by a great number of the findings that there have been. This is clearly a lot of work here. I think clearly there are things moving in the right direction. Much of the work that is being undertaken by the CPS is precisely on liaising with victims and ensuring that their experience is as easy as it possibly can be in the hugely traumatic circumstances in which they clearly are having to operate. There's a lot more work to do on that joint working, but I'm happy to continue liaising with her to update her on that as it goes forward.
Order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the member for Kettering, will be pleased to hear that CPS East Midlands are now making charging decisions for rape cases more quickly. In 2022 and 2023, the area was performing better than the national average in reducing victim attrition.
The Crown Prosecution Service for the work it does in prosecuting offenders and seeking justice for victims in Kettering. What overall assessment has he made of the effectiveness of the CPS across the East Midlands?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. The attorney visited CPS East Midlands office in Leicester just last month, and she tells me she was impressed to hear about the work the prosecutors have been undertaking to tackle both recent and historic instances of child sexual abuse in particular, and securing lengthy sentences for the perpetrators. This is an excellent example of the importance that I've referred to already during the course of this session of joint working between prosecutors and the police.
Are you the shadow MP for Kettering or something? Jim Shannon, I hope it is linked.
Welcome the Minister's answer. It's not only the responsibility of the Minister for Kettering or for the East Midlands, the Minister's responsibility for the United Kingdom as well. How many, to what one-to-one support is offered to victims of sexual crime across the United Kingdom to improve their experience of the criminal justice system? Thank you.
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend for his ingenuity in managing to squeeze that. That's an excellent bit of order paper operation there. I'm very happy to meet with him to talk to him about what we're doing in his area to precisely do what he asks me about, which is smoothing the experience that victims of crime have when they have to go through the criminal justice system. They've suffered trauma already. The system itself should not be adding to that.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CPS has specially trained prosecutors who work closely with law enforcement agencies to bring those who commit the heinous crimes she refers to justice. The CPS has, for example, recently obtained convictions in the first prosecution for trafficking people for organ harvesting. This presented many complex and difficult challenges, and I'd just like to commend the teams in the CPS for their work on that.
Last year, the number of potential UK victims of modern slavery reached a record level, with referrals for women and children both at all-time highs. In 2022, the average wait for a first decision in modern slavery cases was 6 days. In 2023, it was 23 days. Modern slavery is getting worse, not better, and now the UK government's actively making progress in seeking to strip people of modern slavery protections. When will the government accept this is a crisis and take the urgent action needed?
Well, the honourable lady is quite right to draw attention to the seriousness of this crime, but the government really is accepting the urgency of this. I mean, this is why we have, for example, the CPS available to provide early advice to law enforcement in exactly the cases, Mr. Speaker, that she refers to. We have specialist prosecutors providing that advice. That makes sure that we have the right advice, the right charges against the right people at the right time.
Mr. Coulter.
Mr. Speaker, even in freezing conditions at the start of this year, thousands more men, women and children crossed the Channel in small boats. So for all the talk that the threat of deportation to Rwanda will act as a deterrent, there is no evidence whatsoever of that deterrent working. Perhaps that's why, Mr. Speaker, the government seems to have changed tack and now are planning to incentivise refugees with £3,000 to get on the planes to Rwanda. So does the Attorney-General not now accept that the only way to stop the boats is to crush the trafficking gangs and prosecute the criminals?
The Honourable Gentleman was quite right. This is a major challenge this country faces. These are cruel people smuggling gangs who are exploiting people financially and emotionally, and they have to put an end to that. The Rwanda bill, of course, is going through the House. It's been through here. There'll be more opportunities for debate of that. But what he's really done, and I agree with him, is that he has underlined quite how important it is that we take action here, which is what we're doing.
SNP spokesperson Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister's flagship Rwanda bill was defeated 10 times in the House of Lords last week, with calls for the UK Government to protect victims of modern slavery and human trafficking from being removed to Rwanda without their consent until a decision based on conclusive grounds of their safety and not being placed at risk of being re-trafficked has been completed. Does the Minister not agree, does he not understand that modern slavery protections for vulnerable children and adults by his government appear to be expendable?
Well, of course, the bill will be coming back to the Commons next week, I think, and there'll be opportunity to debate those issues further. But I would, of course, point out to the Honourable Lady at this point that the treaty between the Government of Rwanda and the UK includes specific provisions that address the need for protection and support for victims of trafficking.
Number 6, sir.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Colleagues who are regulars at Attorney General's questions know that the Law Officers Convention prevents me from disclosing outside government whether or not I have provided advice and the specifics of that advice. But colleagues also know that I take very seriously my obligations to ensure that the government is acting in a lawful manner, both on the domestic and the international front.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've listened to the Attorney-General, and she will, of course, know, as one of the signatories to the Genocide Convention, the UK Government has a clear responsibility to not only punish, but also, under Article 1, to undertake to prevent genocide as one of the gravest crimes under international law. Given that the Government will still sell arms to the Israeli military after the International Court of Justice found the actions in Gaza to plausibly be in breach of the Genocide Convention, just what legal advice has she provided to the Foreign Office that allows her to fulfil this legal obligation to prevent genocide at the same time as selling arms? And does it not leave the UK complicit in genocide if the ICJ ultimately rule that it is genocide and it's proven that civilians were killed by UK-sold arms?
I believe I dealt with the substance of the Honourable Gentleman's question earlier, which is to say that we respect the independence of the ICJ. We have considerable concerns about this case, which is not helpful in the goal of achieving a sustainable ceasefire. And we accept that the Court has made a provisional measures order, and much of that order we wholeheartedly agree with. We would, however, suggest that we do not bandy around terms such as genocide until there's been a final ruling of the court. The Honourable Gentleman from a sedentary position is asking what advice I've provided. I've explained very clearly why I cannot do that. However, with your leave, Mr Speaker, I would like to take him through some of the process that the FCDO goes through in order to make decisions which inform the business department on export licensing. The FCDO continues to assess Israel's commitment and capability to comply with IHL. The assessments are supported by a detailed evidence base, including analysis of the conflict, reporting from NGOs, international bodies and partner countries, statements from the Israeli government, military representative and Israel's track record. We've asked the government of Israel specific questions about its approach to complying with IHL. I did some of that myself to help inform that advice. The applications for export licenses are assessed on a case-by-case basis against a strategic export licensing criteria, including with regard to IHL. That is a major part of that assessment. We keep licenses under careful and continuing review, and the government is able to amend, suspend or refuse or revoke licenses as circumstances require.
Thank you. We now come to business questions.
Thanks, guys.